and gentlemen, welcome back to Discovery Debrief, a podcast that dives headfirst into the proverbial deep end of the latest trek into the final frontier, Star Trek Discovery. I'm co-host Chris Clow, and I'm joined by two members of our bold panel of Star Trek franchise explorers, including Rachael Clow.
Hello.
And Cicero Holmes.
My captain is much shorter and much whiter.
Unfortunately, Zachy could not join us today, but he ordered us to shoulder on in spite of his absence. So to that end, we've enlisted the help of a very special guest co-host who's going to join us for our discussions today. This man is not only one of the single biggest Star Trek fans that you could ever hope to interact with, but he's also an author of officially released and sanctioned expanded universe material that takes place in our favorite spacefaring universe. His work includes such titles as the TOS novels Crisis of Consciousness and Troublesome Minds, along with contributions in the Star Trek Corps of Engineers Grand Designs short story anthology, and he's also co-written novels taking place in both the TNG and Voyager worlds. He is Mr. Dave Galanter. Dave, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. With that introduction, if I didn't know me better, I would be almost impressed with myself.
You are an impressive person. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Oh, ask my family. I'm not.
Well, Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into our discussions. What is Star Trek to you? How deep would you say your fandom goes? And what are your general thoughts on Discovery specifically, particularly as we get ready to talk about these episodes here?
I think Star Trek is probably my first fandom. Even before a lot of the stuff that, I grew up on as a kid, being, the $6 Million Man and things like that. I was raised in the 70s and 80s. And my mother got me into it. She was a big science fiction fan. So I started with the animated series. And I was such a fan, it was to the point where I would watch In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy and pretend that Mr. Spock was giving me science reports. And so I have either loved or liked or occasionally disliked almost every version of Trek there is, and I think that's like any Star Trek fan. But I've always found something in whichever show it is, whether it be Voyager or Enterprise or Next Generation or DS9, or the movies, something to connect with, whether it was a character or a set of characters or a notion, something interesting. And I found that I can watch it no matter what version it is, whenever it's on. Even the worst, of the movies can attract me while it's on. And Discovery, for me, fits right into all of those. Although I will say I think Discovery is the best Star Trek in a long time, just in that it so holds my interest and keeps me on the edge of my seat as to what's happening. I think they had the best first season, not flawless, but the best first season since the original series. And I think the second season is off to a great start.
Yeah, very well said. I don't think you're going to get much of an argument from us here, because we're all pretty big fans of this show. I mean, obviously we have a podcast that's dedicated to it, but
yeah, we can hate it.
I think we're critical of it in appropriate places,
yes,
but that doesn't get in the way of the fact that this seems to be a pretty exceptional show, all things considered. So I think you're going to find that we probably align pretty closely. So thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate having you aboard for this.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. So the episodes that we're going to be discussing today account for some pretty major firsts in the series' second season, as well as a kind of first for the franchise itself at large. Our first point of discussion is the first time we've checked in on the political intrigue at the highest levels of the Klingon Empire, while also giving us a little bit of insight into the family dynamics of Sarek and Amanda's house, while both Michael and Spock lived under the same roof. And since we were off for a week, we will be talking about two episodes here. So the second, more momentous first, is the reintroduction of a character not seen since the original Star Trek pilot episode, and it gives us a very broad and unique look at the characters in a crisis situation aboard the ship, and a twist on an old Trek concept by showing us last contact. A lot of stuff happened in these, So we're not going to belabor the point. Normally, people who listen to the show, you're accustomed to hearing news and sort of what we've been up to since the last time we recorded, but we have a lot to talk about, so let's hit it. So the first episode we're going to be discussing is Point of Light. Amanda Grayson arrives on board Discovery with a stolen copy of Spock's medical records from the psychiatric facility he has voluntarily entered. Pike orders Commander Burnham to decrypt the files. The files lead Amanda to confirm that Spock has drawn the Red Angel since he was a child. Burnham tells her that to protect him from Vulcan's murderous logic extremists, she hurt Spock irreparably and caused their ongoing estrangement in order to create more distance between them, since she had remained a target of the xenophobic Vulcans throughout her life. So, first point of discussion, guys, we discussed last year that we were all a little wary of the idea of Spock and Burnham's estrangement coming from some kind of bitterness or resentment, but it looks like that's the avenue that they're going with to explain, at least here in the early going, that they haven't had much of a connection in their early Starfleet careers. What do you guys make of this positioning? Is it the most efficient explanation that someone can apply to make this dynamic make sense? Or do you prefer that if they'd have gone in a different direction? Cicero, kick us off.
Well, I will say that the first things first, they had to do this, right? It had to be something very simple, very boilerplatey to at least start us off. Mm-hmm. That I think that's okay, because like much of this show and much of the series so far, I can guarantee you that there is a lot of nuance under that crust. Mm-hmm. So I'm not worried about it in the least, that this is how we, how it set off and how we started down this road of what their sibling confrontation complications are. But because I really do trust these writers to figure something out with regards to that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's understandable. Rachel, what do you think about this dynamic as it's set up here?
I'm just thankful that they're not in love with each other.
Fair.
That potential plot line was freaking me out a little bit. So
thank you, Cicero.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. I'm here for that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that she would have to drive him away or whatever. So
mm-hmm.
I'm happy with it.
Okay. Dave, what do you think?
I got to say, it never occurred to me that they might go in the direction of them being some sort of a couple. But, there are certain familial cliches, like estrangement, that are cliches because they are true. Sure. I have an older brother that I didn't talk to for 8 years.
Right.
And we actually are in very good terms now. It took the death of our parents, at respective different times, the first one to slowly bring us together and the last one to more closely unite us, and realize that what we had harbored as adults were our views of each other as children. And I can see something maybe similar sort of holding Spock and Burnham apart if they got opinions of each other when they were kids. And they've just held on to that as adults. I'm hoping it's something along those lines, since I've experienced something similar myself.
Sure.
But I got to tell you, I also like the idea of it not being as bitter, at least on her part, because it sounds to me like if she was trying to protect him, that's out of love.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid perspective. I mean, it's going to be intriguing to see just how sort of lopsided those familial affections will be, particularly if Spock potentially has none, not just because he's a Vulcan, but because well, something happened to estrange them. But I mean, I'm the way that it was positioned in the early going of this episode, because we're going to come back to this later in the full discussion.
Sure.
And I have another angle to explore, courtesy of Zachy, actually.
Nice.
But I was actually pretty okay with the way that it was explained here in the early going. But I mean, it does kind of make me nervous, and I'll expound upon that further a little bit later on. But
Chris, before we go on, I just want to say this.
Yes.
I have a sinking suspicion that whatever Burnham's attempts are to reconcile this difference, and as Dave pointed out, just the estrangement is part of family dynamics. As Dave talked about his estrangement from his brother, I've talked on the show about my estrangement from both my father and my sons,
Right.
For various different reasons, and have managed to make those things work better, and not as a result of tragedy, thank goodness. But I believe, with regards to Spock and Burnham, that it will end, not necessarily tragically, but I think there is a level of tragedy with regards to Michael Burnham as a person that we will see throughout this entire series. We've already seen it already, kind of the tragic introduction of a first love last year with Lieutenant Tyler. The loss of, the understanding that they can't be together, the heartbreak of finding out that person was actually a double agent, was not necessarily who she thought he was. And I think also additionally that we will see something occur during the course of this season that will lead us to believe that the relationship between Burnham and Spock is irrevocably destroyed, and that will give the writers a reason not to reintroduce Spock, and it will give the canon enough space to make it reasonable that Spock doesn't mention her in the future, which happens to be the past for us.
Yeah, and this actually got me thinking, because the way that the prequel is applied in other fictional timelines or fictional universes, if you want to put it that way.
Right.
A failure to mention a character who is retconned in doesn't usually portend good things for that character in the future.
Correct.
And I mean, the one that's, well, I probably shouldn't bring up the one that's on my mind.
Spoiling Clow.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to bring up the one that's on my mind, but I mean, it usually doesn't bode well.
I'll say it. I'll say Cybok, if that's what you're trying to say.
We have talked a little bit about whether or not Cybok is going to show up. I mean, honestly, we've seen every other member of Sarek's house.
Right.
Why not? I mean, I think there's room for it, but
because he's imaginary.
Rachel takes the Roddenberry approach to Star Trek V in that it is apocryphal to her.
It's just all a fever dream.
If I may, I think
Please.
Spock is a very private guy. He didn't tell anybody that he was betrothed, or what Pon Farr was, or any of these things. And these were his best friends. And,
Yes.
If it doesn't need to come up, my guess is Spock isn't going to mention it, so that we've never heard it before. Doesn't lead us one way or another. Spock has never mentioned that he's gone potty, but I assume that he goes to the bathroom.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, if not only did he not tell them that he was betrothed, but he never told them about a half brother, which is canon, Rachel. It's true.
Out of my head.
Okay, fair enough. But either way, I mean, there's no reason to think that he would ever need to expound on the existence of Michael or their relationship. And since we know how Spock's life is going to go in the future, I'm going to be interested that, once Spock actually gets incorporated into the show, how the characterization and what we see from him will ultimately sync up with the guy that we do know, because I'm sure that there's going to be some connective tissue there. But let's move along to the second point. So the logic extremists are still a pretty pivotal thorn in the side of the family of Sarek. And some Star Trek fans seem to be annoyed by their continuing existence, but I wanted to run something by you guys. Is it possible that this faction is extending from the misguided sect of Vulcans that were led by Administrator Vlas, and by extension, I guess, who he was kind of a puppet of the Romulan Empire, but is it possible that these Vulcans, these logic extremists, are sort of left over from that rather interesting period of Vulcan history in the 22nd century that we saw in Enterprise? Rachel, we rewatched some of those, or part of those episodes recently. Do you see any alignment with these guys?
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
I don't I don't really exactly remember the ins and outs of the political alignments of everyone in that episode.
It was like a perversion of the ideals of Serac. That was kind of what they went with. Like they had, although
they were the mainstream at that point, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's what. Yeah, I mean, that seems entirely possible.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if you're gonna have Vulcan extremists, they have to be like logic extremists, right? Because that's
conceivably.
Yeah, I don't know why that would annoy anybody. That makes sense to me. That
I think what
so they have a different interpretation of logic.
Well, I think what annoys those like entrenched anti-discovery fans is that their extremism in their devotion to logic leads them to violence.
Yeah, that's totally plausible.
Yeah,
like, you can logic yourself into anything if you think hard enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Extremism comes in many forms.
Yes.
Yeah. Why would Vulcans be exempt from that? Dave, this kind of seems like the kind of a fold that an EU story could play in. Is there enough plausible, like if you were charged with writing the history of the logic extremists, is this a thread that you would draw? Do you think this is a plausible connection?
No, only in that I think they would be opposite. Now, it's been a while since I've seen those Enterprise episodes, but if I remember correctly, it was, reunification early.
Sure.
And I don't, if a logic extremist wouldn't look at the Romulans and say, hey, they're uber logical, let's join up with them. I think it would be in opposition to someone who would want to bring Romulans and Vulcans together. I also think it's a commentary on just sort of the notion that you can have a logical argument, but if your premise isn't logical, it falls apart. And the logic extremists are extremely logical in their argument, but their premise is wrong. And I think that's a philosophical commentary that maybe would be interesting to dive into in a book. But I'll tell you, I think it's interesting that they exist just because I don't like any society, whether it's the Klingons or the Romulans or the Vulcans, to be so monolithic in their thinking or haircuts that they don't have individuals and groups with different thoughts and ideas. And I like the idea that there are some extremists on Vulcan and that they're doing interesting and horrible things, which are plot complications, which are nice for writers.
Absolutely. And a little perhaps uncomfortably recognizable too for those
yes.
of us living in the modern world. Yeah, well said. Cicero, what do you think about that?
Well, it's kind of impossible to have a utopian society that also peddles and worships. And the Vulcans definitely, while they are explorers and they are the key members that help the humans, who are the greatest thing that has ever happened to the universe, apparently, create the Federation of the UFP. It doesn't make it's illogical to believe that they have flown around with ships that are capable of violence and aggression, and don't have people amongst themselves that would take the next step, flawed or not. Whether their thesis statement is flawed or not, you can take that logic, and if you say to a Vulcan, if a Vulcan believes that because they are so logical, they are the best representatives to govern all species, and so we should either enslave our own people, enslave dissidents, in one way, shape, or form, and the way to do that the most efficiently is by doing it via, or the most expediently is by doing it via violent means. So logic extremists make perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and the commentary aspect of it, you can't ignore, just because the best Star Trek is usually of its time in one regard or another. And I really like, the logic extremists haven't gotten a lot of play in the second season, but we got to see two pretty distinct flavors of extremism in season 1, extending first from the logic extremists and then also from T'Kuvma and the philosophy that T'Kuvma's followers had in strictly adhering to the ideals of Kahless. And that's very ripe territory to explore, especially if the Federation is supposed to be a body that represents moderation and compromise in its best scenarios. I mean, compromise is the name of the game among most of the crew dynamics across the entire franchise, and there's no reason to think that wouldn't be a dynamic shared by the Federation at large. Obviously, that's a conclusion that I'm drawing, but I feel like it's a pretty reasonable one. But juxtaposing that moderation and compromise with extremism, whether it comes from a scary Klingon or a prim and proper Vulcan, is a possible source for very stark imagery that can stick with you. I remember being pretty disturbed when that Vulcan extremist aboard Sarek's shuttle was getting ready to detonate himself. Not only was I not expecting it, but you don't expect extremism to be so clean cut, I guess, which is also kind of a commentary on today in one respect. Right. So yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. See, we dovetailed from Enterprise continuity into the philosophical aim of what this could represent for the franchise at large in this episode specifically. That's awesome. I like it. Well, let's move along with the plot. So Klingon Chancellor L'Rell unveils the D7 battlecruiser as a symbol of a united Kronos to the houses, also showing us that Ash Tyler, formerly Voq, serves as the torchbearer and a direct advisor to the Chancellor. Later, L'Rell introduces Ash Voq to the baby son that she and Voq had together. The leader of House Kor and father of Kol threatens to kill Ash Voq and their son, but in an elaborate battle between the two sides, Ash and L'Rell manage to kill the traitor and his men with the help of Philippa Georgiou, now an operative of the elusive Section 31. To consolidate power, L'Rell presents fake heads of her lover and son to the Klingon High Council, with the Council acclaiming her as mother of all Klingons. Oh boy, so I kind of condensed all of the Klingon stuff into just this part of the discussion, but more Klingon intrigue is always interesting when taken from the Discovery perspective. I know that sometimes the focus on Klingon politics in the first season became a little grating, particularly for Zaki. It was kind of, was that the dawn of Zaki's agony booth?
It might have been.
It very well might have been. But what did you guys make of the way that the Klingon issues were presented here? Did you enjoy the way that they played out? Were they a little easier to follow, or did you see them as an impediment to the flow of the episode? Dave, what did you think?
I was happy to see more talking in English. And not because, I mean, I appreciate it when it's in another language, but I got to say, Klingon does not flow. And it's far easier, I think, for the actors to show emotion when they're talking in English, even if it's around those teeth. I thought it was I like linear plot. I thought it was a fairly nice linear plot. And I also got to say, I really like Ash in that he's got all these memories of another person, but none of the feelings. And what a struggle he's on. I hope we get to stick with that character and see more of that character because he's interesting.
Yeah. No, totally agree. Rachel, how did this stuff play out for you? You joined Zaki pretty much in your criticism of the way that the Klingon stuff played out in the first season. Did that carry over here?
Well, I like their hair. I guess like most of the episodes so far, I felt like this storyline of this episode in particular, like, went by so blazingly fast.
Mhm.
At one point, I think like it was like I looked up and it had been 10 minutes and like 4 or 5 plot points had been like hit. Like it was like Ash calls Michael. Ash has a son with Laurel. The uncle is dead, and this is all like within like really fast, like boom, 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 and I'm like, oh, okay, like I don't know. I mean, it's not my job to make a TV episode, so like I can't really offer any solutions, right? I just say that me as a viewer, I felt like my hair was just blowing in the wind because I'm going so quickly through all of these things. So that's really my only complaint. I mean, it was, for being as fast as it was, I was not confused. So I appreciate that. And I don't know if this was supposed to be a backdoor pilot for the Section 31 show. But maybe it was. Although I think they were on it next time on, so they're gonna.
Yeah.
They'll be back.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was supposed to be that or if it was like but it seems like it's gonna be continued. So, but yeah, I found that interesting. I really enjoyed seeing Philippa Georgiou in her like holographic Klingon outfit.
Yeah,
that was really.
And her googly eyes at the baby.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, no, seeing her again, I already knew that I think we all knew that she was already an ass kicker, but geez, that the brutality, she seems right at home in doing what she's doing. So I'm going to be interested to see more from her. Cicero, what did you think of this stuff?
Well, I think the first part is glossing over the fact that Philippa Georgiou convinced Laurel that she had to get rid of, and you know what, Dave really brought up a great point about Ash Volk, Lieutenant Tyler, Lieutenant Volk, which is that he is such a complex character because he's got all the memories of this person without any of the feelings, and you look at Laurel, who's got all of the feelings for the lover she left, the lover she destroyed, basically, to create Ash Tyler, and all of those feelings are still, enveloped in this person who is now human outwardly, but is the first human Klingon hybrid, basically, who's living these dual lives, and he doesn't reciprocate. And Georgiou comes in and says, look, not only do you have to get rid of this dude you love, and you're willing to fight the entire Klingon army, empire for, but you're also going to have to get rid of the baby, which is the living embodiment of the love from the physical lover that you lost. You're gonna have to get rid of both of them in order to continue to be the emperor this empire that will tear itself apart. So do you choose, do you choose family over country, basically? And she chose country. And while it was quick, and I definitely do agree with Rachel about the speed with which they've kind of pushed through a lot of plot points so far in the season. I understand why they did that, but I'm hoping that going forward we do get to see some of Laurel's anguish with the choice, with the choice that she was forced essentially to make. The other thing that was quintessential, I think, in this little portion was the fact that already throughout the course of the season, we kind of had the first episode kind of set the tone of introducing Pike and introducing everything that happened with Pike and the Enterprise and setting up Spock and doing all that other stuff. The second episode kind of set the tone for how the season will be as a viewer, where they changed it from this serialized version that was, season one, that was more like Game of Thrones, more like today's television, and made it more, made season two more like the Trek that we're used to. But this third episode also took the time to talk about those other characters that were very, very important towards the end of season one, and showed us exactly where they are in this particular point in time, before they went on to back to the Discovery and back to the crew and everything else. So I thought that was very important. Yeah,
most definitely. I think that's a really good point. Well, my brother, I mentioned him a couple of times before, but he was basically the one that got me into Star Trek. And he watches Discovery, not on the day, but he absorbs the episodes pretty fast. And as soon as he watched this one, or in fact, I think it was while he was watching it, his mind was blown by the way that things shifted into English by morphing the subtitles. Sure. He loved that. He texted me right in the moment to say how awesome that was, and I got a big kick out of that. But
so they stole that from the seminal film from the late 90s or maybe early aughts, L. Ron Hubbard's Battlefield Earth. So that's if there was one thing, and I love Travolta, I love Forrest Whitaker. That movie was a dumpster fire. It was it was the Inhumans of motion pictures.
Oh, whoa!
My guess is you can't say it was stolen because I'm not sure enough people watched that movie to steal anything.
Right. But yeah, so that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about that film. Or the thing that I really enjoyed about that film was the fact that they started with the crazy, goofy, platform wearing alien race speaking in their own tongue, and then quickly with subtitles, and then quickly morphing to English with a couple of lines of whatever the foreign language, their alien language, as being the subtitles, and then they continue to speak English, which was a way for them to let the viewer know they're still speaking their language, but we're tired of writing subtitles and you don't want to read them anyway. So here we go.
Well, hey, I mean, only steal from the best, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's a battlefield, presuming it does qualify as theft, which Dave makes a very good argument that it doesn't. But no, I mean, I agree with Rachel's point in that packing too much plot into an episode is something that we have seen from this show before. Yes. Right? I mean, that was a complaint that I think all of us had about the first season finale, was that it just kind of ended, or it came to an end rather abruptly and resolved the war a little too quickly for all of our liking.
At least they're giving us more minutes this time. There were some episodes that were very short last season.
Yes, that's true. But also, too, I prefer that if we are going to get kind of a plot crash, if you want to call it that, I probably prefer that it happen early in the season as opposed to at the end of it.
Amen.
for whatever that's worth, presuming that maybe this means that the rest of the plot can breathe going forward. I mean, we'll get on to the next episode, to the 4th episode of the season in a couple of minutes here, but that I think we know pretty well that packing too much into an episode is not something that that is often easy to overcome, especially when it has such a big story in front of it. And it seems like this is a particularly big one, if I can extrapolate a little bit going forward. But still pretty cool. I like seeing the Klingon politics and how Section 31 is doing such Section 31 things by actually interfering in the political affairs of a power in the galaxy that is not particularly friendly. But the posture right now with L'Rell in leadership is kind of friendly to the Federation. It kind of brings up moments from history of the United States propping up leaders for nations that we weren't exactly on the friendliest of terms with, but we had friendly relations with unfriendly governments for times, like the Shah of Iran is what immediately comes to mind. But it's such a very Section 31 thing to do. And I hope that portends a lot of really cool things, not only for the rest of season 2 of this show, but for the Georgiou show going forward.
Right.
But hey, guys, now it's time.
It's pedantic continuity time.
All right, pedantic continuity time. Sure, I hadn't heard that yet. Well, so the D7 makes a canonical appearance predating its arrival in the original series as a symbol of unity for the Empire. Also, Klingons have hair. Rachel alluded to this. Klingons have hair.
Sorry, I spoiled you.
But so Burnham made mention of Klingons having grown their hair out post-war, and for some reason, and Dave, I know that you saw this, a lot of people seem to have interpreted this as a retcon saying that they shave during wars. And I mean, the thing that just immediately came to my mind was that this was a byproduct potentially of T'Kuvma's religious extremism, like I talked about a couple of minutes ago. What do you guys think of the D7 nod and the addition of Klingon hair? Cicero?
Well, it goes to show you, and this is going to generate a lot of hate for those people that listen to our show.
We do know that there are people out there that do that, by the way.
Right.
We
So
know for a fact.
This will generate a lot of that hate, and that is canon doesn't matter that much. Yeah, and this is why I say that. It's canon is important, but it doesn't matter that much when you're producing new content, right? Because they were able to, and we'll talk about this in this episode. We talked about it very briefly in the first episode, and in the 4th episode that we'll talk about in a few minutes, where there were one-lines given that explained away days, weeks, and maybe even months of outrage about this show specifically and its positioning within the timeline of the Star Trek universe, but also it's meddling with established characters and a established character canon. They were able to say really quickly that Pike got new uniforms, or Pike said that the Enterprise got the new uniforms. Boom, there you go. Immediately, you can talk about the differences between TOS uniforms and Discovery uniforms. Done. Mm-hmm. Then we talk about Klingon hair, and the Klingons have hair, and the reason that they have hair now is they're not at war. Boom, done. And you can speculate as to what that really means, and that's fine. And then in the next episode, we'll talk about it really quickly, I'm sure. But why there are only view screens on the Enterprise?
Yeah,
is again a throwaway line. But they add it, and I feel like each time they do these things, they kind of point at you, Uncle Sam point at you and then wink at you. And so I mean, so from that perspective, like, these things make sense. These one lines allow you to connect the dots, and it again shows that canon doesn't matter that much. It's still important, but it doesn't matter that much.
Very interesting perspective. And see, I think, Cicero, you are a little bit more, I guess, liberal than I am when it comes to adherence to canon, because I think canon is one of Star Trek's greatest strengths. But it doesn't. I think Discovery has made me come around on whether or not that should apply so strictly to aesthetics. Like, I'm more like the canon of events should be observed, and I don't think that Discovery steps on anything.
No.
Dave, this is perfect territory for you. What do you think of all of these thoughts? How do you think that that the connections made in this episode connected? And what's your philosophy, I guess, on the canonicity of Discovery and what it observes when in terms of events and aesthetics and all of those things?
My feeling has always been that any questions of canon should be given to Captain James R. Kirk of the United Earth Space Probe Agency, who either has 3 nephews or 1.
Very well said.
It's a television show or a set of movies. They're stories. They're all just stories. And if I like continuity more than canon.
Well said.
I want there to be continuity, and quite frankly, some of the problems that I had with the first season wasn't a canon issue. I don't care about how the ships look and how the uniforms look, because we have to keep looking like it's the future, and mid-century Danish modern looked like the future in the 1960s, but doesn't today. But I had concerns about Sarek being Sarek. And I'll be honest with you, one of the ways in which I sort of fixed that in my own headcanon was, here's a guy who treats his human daughter completely differently than his half-human Vulcan son. So there are certain ways that I could get around how Sarek was acting, although he did feel a little bit off for me. My main problem with the people who are like, but the D7 and the so-and-so, and oh my God, it's the set dressing. I'm telling you right now, as soon as Gene Roddenberry had budget, the Klingons didn't look like the Klingons.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is Gene wanted them to look alien. And in the 60s, the only Vulcaneers were expensive. That's why some of the Romulans wore helmets. They did the Klingons because, hey, swarthy makeup and a mustache, we can do that pretty cheaply. I mean, they can afford now to make things look like these giant touch screens and all of this. So let's go with it. I don't think we should do machinations to try and explain stuff away that isn't character related. It's character and story related stuff that I care about, not the look and feel, and quite frankly, not even the cloaking device thing, because Enterprise had cloaking devices. Well, they didn't have one, but long time ago, the Romulans of that era that we didn't get to see had a cloaking device. Obviously, the technology's been there for a long time. Why wouldn't the Klingons have a version of it? The idea is that you're always able to see through it every few years, probably.
Yeah. No.
Did I rant enough about that?
No,
I'm sorry.
Hey.
I've been really upset at the people who are like, this isn't the prime universe or the canon universe because blah 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 blah. Yeah, listen, they're all just stories, Bob.
No, I think that's well said. I mean, that's exactly the kind of tangent that I like people to go on in pedantic continuity time. So, no, much appreciated, and I largely agree with you, Rachel. You have you generally like to stick to established events, at least when it comes to Star Trek. So what did you think of this Klingon stuff in this episode specifically?
What's the problem with the D7?
I haven't seen any complaints about the D7 except
okay.
I don't.
I have that they mentioned that a previous ship that we saw in the first season was called the D7 and it looked totally different.
George Foreman named all his kids George. So, they look distinct, but they're still named George. So,
look, I mean, I enjoyed the Klingons with hair. I didn't need them to explain why they now had hair.
Yeah.
Like, I would have assumed that, they heard me bitching that they didn't have any hair before, and they look better with hair. And so they updated the design to make it a little bit cooler.
To be fair, they did say when the first season started that they would be slowly moving toward, the original series that we remember.
But yeah, for those who care, I'm glad that they have these little winks and nods. But I don't mind that much anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Full disclosure too, last night Rachel and I were watching Broken Bow, the pilot episodes for Enterprise. And I pointed out to her that within, 25 minutes, there were already something like 3 or 4 pretty big continuity discrepancies from things that had been established before.
Right.
The fact that Klingon First Contact happened in 2151, well, that doesn't really conflict with what Spock told us in Star Trek 6. And they allude to Klingons having stealth technology, which you're kind of led to believe could be a cloak. And so there's already, but I mean, you could pick that stuff apart. And I still think that that's a really solid set of episodes, regardless of all of that stuff. But for those of us that do notice, I still think that Discovery is exercising generally more care to fit into things than even some of the shows that Rick Berman ran. I mean, early seasons of Enterprise had those kinds of issues that they didn't really bother me per se, but I just detected them. And I guess I was just annoyed that I detected them, even though I guess I was annoyed that they weren't observing it. Like, why do I have to? Isn't that your job? But either way, that doesn't get in the way of enjoying the stories as long as the intent of the stories are good. And I'm still someone who gives Enterprise a fair amount of leeway, but I think that Discovery is doing, and we've discussed this before, and Dave, I think that you would agree that things that are being alluded to in Discovery episodes it's so evident that the writer's room of the show pays such strict attention to what we've seen before, at least when it comes to the events. The production design, the aesthetic, all of those things are very different. That doesn't bother me. I'm a comic book fan. I see aesthetics change all the time. A Batman has his new 52 costume, but that's a story that took place in the 70s. Well, but I don't care.
Right.
As long as the story is good.
I think they mainly care about those events. I think sometimes they can be off on character. But again, my James Kirk is different from another writer's James Kirk. And they've got different writers in there. And I think the aesthetics, if the show had looked like The Cage, I don't think it would have the newer fan base that it's getting. And I think it is getting a newer fan base. And I think you have to do that. Eventually, those of us who were classic Star Trek fans from back in the day, we're going to die off. CBS wants Star Trek to live long and prosper. And to do that, you need to make new fans. And to them, it has to look like the future. It can't look like a 1950s serial, which, by the way, if you look at The Cage, that's basically how it looked.
Yep, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that goes with any property under the sun, and Star Trek is certainly no exception. If you want Star Trek to subsist, if you want it to continue, you need to bring in fresh blood. And couldn't agree more. All right, well, let's move along with the plot. So Georgiou takes Ashvok and the baby to a vessel crewed by Section 31 delivering the baby to a cloistered Klingon monastery and recruiting Ashvok into Section 31. Meanwhile, a sentient spore has grown within Ensign Tilly, causing her to hallucinate that she's talking to a dead schoolmate. Burnham deduces the cause, then Stamets pulls the fungal parasite out of Tilly using dark matter. Fungal parasite is then captured in the engineering lab. So, kind of part two of Pedantic Continuity Time, the Klingon Monastery on Boreth makes its first referenced appearance in the 23rd century. A lot of stuff is happening, but let's address a major fan theory right up front. So, we talked early on in the last season, before Voq went through his transformation, about this idea that Voq himself could have possibly been the albino Klingon that was seen in Deep Space Nine, the enemy that united Kor, Kang, and Koloth, along with Jadzia Dax in a blood oath of vengeance. What do you guys think now? I mean, did you guys maybe stick to the idea that Voq himself was the albino way back when? What do you think the likelihood is that this character could be referenced going forward? Dave, what do you think about that?
If this child is never going to, I mean, if cloistered and everything, I'm assuming that we're never going to see him again. And so I think they're just going to leave it as a question, and maybe you make up that story in your own mind. I never thought that Voq was, because I think that would have made him, well, I guess Kor, and I guess it's around that time. I guess it could have been him. But I got to be honest with you. I never put much into that theory unless there was something was going to come of it. And I didn't get the sense from the first season that they were trying to, tie into everything, including DS9.
Right. Sure. Very fair point. Cicero, you seem to be a little excited, if memory serves, about this possible connection. What do you think about that now? Has its time passed, or is it still something that you think could bear fruit?
So, I mean, there was definitely a time in the moment. There was a belief that if once we revealed who Javid Iqbal really was, that we were going to get a return of Ash back into Voq. And once that became apparent that was not happening, and then immediately as I was watching this episode and watching, and knew the fate of the baby, 100% that baby is the albino from DS9. 100%. Take it to the bank.
Jeez.
Take it to the bank.
Throwing the gauntlet down.
Throwing the gauntlet down. I don't half steps. No half steps over in the Holmes household, man.
Rachel, you like that episode quite a bit from Deep Space Nine. Do you think that there's a...
And I thought, as soon as I saw Vulcan, they were like, "You're an albino. You jerk." And like, I was like, "Oh, it's the albino." And then like Cicero said, it became apparent that Voq wasn't coming back. And so I was like, okay, well, I even thought in the off season about this theory, which I had been so proud of myself for thinking of, making that connection. And I thought about it and I was like, man, so the albino is just some random albino that is another Klingon albino. Well, I guess there's probably a lot of Klingon albinos, whatever. I don't know how common that is. So I was like really happy. As soon as I saw the baby, I thought, oh, okay, I bet that's him. And now I think 100%.
Okay.
Like,
I mean,
but I don't know if they're ever they're probably never gonna reference it.
Do they have time?
Yeah, they don't have time for that to happen. My thought was, when I thought that Voq was the albino, I thought that we were going to see some of the events that are referenced in that DS9 episode. And I doubt that those events are within the time scope of Discovery knowing how old the baby is.
Right.
So we probably won't see them, but it makes me happy. It's not just some random albino. It's
the albino.
It's baby Voq.
Right. It's Voq Rel.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I remember, and I actually have the Memory Alpha page. So the Memory Alpha page makes direct reference to 2290 as the year that that Kor, Kang, and Koloth collided with the albino, which would be right near the end of there's just a few years before the Enterprise A is decommissioned. So that's pretty late. I mean, that's what, 30, 33, 40, 43? 33 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time. I mean, maybe in season 7 we'll see.
Well, they wouldn't have become friends with him as a baby.
That's true. I mean, maybe, who knows? Maybe in season 7 of Discovery, if it gets that far, God willing,
Hey,
we'll see
knock on wood, baby.
This little bastard of a kid who like pushes people over on Boreth and smiles about it, and you'll be like, that little bastard of a kid is the albino.
Like, I'm so smart. I know so many things.
But who knows? I mean, it's still kind of a fun thing to talk about, though, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because, hey, they went out of their way to mention that he was an albino, and the last albino Klingon we were aware of was Deep Space Nine. But anyway, so I kind of backloaded all of the stuff with May, with the mycelial parasite, if you want to call her that.
Right.
Because I feel like it warrants a little more discussion. She seems to potentially be, and this might be me extrapolating, maybe I'm drawing an early conclusion, but it seems like this could be the first domino to fall in the full closing of access to the mycelial network. And, you know, we've talked about the entrenched anti-Discovery fans, and they keep screaming to high heaven to anybody that'll listen about how the presence of the spore drive is some uber violation of the canon. Why didn't Voyager have access to it? And I think all of us know that that's kind of a stupid question, considering where this show takes place. But do you guys think that the spore drive's time is nearly up? Or do you think May herself could mean something in particular as we progress deeper into the season when it comes to potentially closing the door on the existence, or at least the active practice, of the spore drive? Rachel?
Yeah. So May she seemed to mention that the spore drive, or the activation of the spore drive, was doing something really bad to her brethren or her world or something.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was in the next episode, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
Well, I mean, it seems to me like the way this is going is that the activating the spore drive does something really awful to the mycelial network, and that they're going to have to sort of shut it down.
Yeah.
And classify it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it stands to reason that they would think of some dire consequences to running the spore drive such that you can never have it be mentioned again, especially if the writers are gonna take the time to explain why the Klingons now have hair. Like, they're gonna think of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we have to worry about there being any continuity issues. I'm sure that all will be explained in time.
Sure. Absolutely. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, if there's one, quote, continuity issue, unquote, that I would assume Discovery was going to fix from the start, it would be this.
Way to go out on a limb, Dave.
we saw the first step of it when the Glen was destroyed.
Right.
In the first season. If you have two ships like this, and now you only have one ship like this, well, something's going to happen. I mean, heck, they couldn't really even get it to work without Stamets at this point. So he's not going to live forever. Voyager wouldn't have had access to him.
Very true. Cicero?
Maybe that's the continuity right there, is that Stamets was dead, therefore the spore drive technology died with him. Right, the spore drive. Yeah.
Oh,
well, why didn't Discovery have it? Because Stamets was dead.
Oh man, brutal.
So here, maybe I'll be a lot more conservative when we talk about the next episode, but here I'm just going balls to the walls, man. So I'm going to say something that I think is also controversial, and that is that the spore drive for Discovery will never go away. They will find a way to keep it going. And the reason I say that is this: the spore drive is the conceit of this series. So every series has its little hook. And this is not this is not relegated just to Star Trek. This is every show. Like Knight Rider was about a guy who sang German songs all the time, but in his off time, but it was also about a guy who rode in a robot car that seemed like it was sentient. But that wasn't enough. Like, he couldn't just solve crimes in a robot car. It was a robot car that could go really fast when you hit the turbo boost button. And so every episode, there was a moment where he hit the turbo boost button. And as a kid, you got excited. And, when the Lions form Voltron, or when the Power Rangers form, go from the Zords to the Megazord, like those are those moments. And
Nice.
and that is part of the conceit to Discovery. Every Star Trek show that didn't have the Enterprise as the main ship had a conceit. DS9 was on a space platform, basically. They were in a fort, in space, and that was the conceit. Voyager had to go to, they had to go to the Delta Quadrant.
Mm-hmm.
So like that was part of them, that was part of the journey. And they teased throughout all of Voyager them leaving the Delta Quadrant, but they couldn't. And this is the conceit of Discovery. It's not just about these characters. These characters are great. It's not about the stories that they're telling. These stories are great. It's also about this ship, and the ship is unique because of this one thing, and that one thing can't go away.
I think that's a fair argument to make. Yeah,
I agree with that.
It's a
You agree with my argument, or that it was a fair argument to make?
No, I agree with your argument. I think while they may be setting it up why we can't have it on the other ships, I think Discovery is going to keep it, and obviously it's going to have to stay a secret, I would guess. Maybe that's where Section 31 comes in.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point too. There's certainly a lot of possibilities there. I don't know. The thing that I just think of when it comes to the spore drive, I guess, is the warp drive speed limit that was imposed for environmental concerns in the Next Generation. I think that's probably one of the closer applications to something like this. But
that was quickly ignored after about 4 episodes.
That is a very fair point to bring up, because that's absolutely the truth. But also, too, I mean, Starfleet and the Federation at large tend to freak out if they're playing, if it's discovered that someone in their ranks is playing God, and if they eventually figure out, as it kind of looks like they're about to, that using the spore drive could alter the destiny of a civilization, of some kind of civilization, I think they're going to see that as a huge red flag. That doesn't necessarily mean that the spore drive is going to go away, but it could potentially be used much less than it is. But I think that I still think that this is probably the beginning of some sort of change in the affairs of the spore drive that will line up with everything that we know when it comes to the rest of the Prime timeline. But either way, who's to guess? I just think that it's pretty interesting considering how they're setting things up.
We're to guess. I mean, that's the whole point of the show. Is
well, yeah, sure.
We are to guess. I'm going to be quite literal right now. But also, I will say that I think you're right, Chris, that its use will be diminished. They're going to add more weight to the use of the spore drive as a narrative. Yeah. So narratively, when we, the viewer, see it being used, we are going to feel the weight of that choice.
Yeah,
going
when whoever the next captain is going to be says
Right.
black alert,
Right.
all of us will collectively go, holy shit.
Right.
Like that's where they're going with this. This is such a threat that it requires instantaneous travel.
Right.
I vote for SARU for
Yes.
captain.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you,
oh,
Dave.
You and Cicero are absolutely on the same page when it comes to that.
Yes. Great minds.
Absolutely. Well, so that's going to do it for that discussion for episode 3 of season 2, Point of Light. So let's moving right along, as Kermit the Frog once said, to season 2, episode 4, An Obol for Charon. So, episode 4, Aboard Discovery. Captain Pike welcomes aboard his executive officer from the Enterprise, Number 1, who offers him an update on the diagnosis and repairs taking place aboard the disabled ship. Number 1 details that the holographic messaging system contributed to the cascading systems failure, and Pike orders the system to be gutted from the ship. Number 1 also details that she dug a little deeper into the case surrounding Spock, thinking that something doesn't add up, and that she's not willing to give up Spock without a fight. So this is a pretty momentous occasion for obvious reasons, as it's the first time we've seen Number 1 in new story material since the original Star Trek pilot episode, The Cage. What did you think, guys? It was the first time that new footage for this character was shot since 1964. What do you make of Rebecca Romijn as Number 1? Dave, kick us off.
I thought she was great. I definitely sensed that she had seen the performance and without trying to mimic it, was trying to sort of be that character. And I totally want a Pike Number 1, Spock, and whomever else series on the Enterprise. If they're creating this series and that series, they can create that series. I want to see it.
No argument here. Rachel, you're kind of a fan of Number 1. So what did you think of her appearance here?
Seemed like the same character to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was really happy, and I was happy that they kind of added a few things in, like people owe her favors.
Mm-hmm.
She's a good officer, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I hope we see more of her.
I do too. Yeah. I think we will. I can't remember.
It would be nice if she could have a name.
Yeah. We'll get to that. Cicero, Number 1. What did you think?
There's a lot of fans who are glad otherwise.
Okay.
There you go. Cicero, what did you make of Number 1?
Man, I said I was going to be conservative when we talked about this episode, but so right off the bat, like it's, man, I love the performance, but I felt it was so wasted right there, because she literally beamed onto the ship, walked down a hallway, had a conversation, and was never seen again. And to me, I felt like it was one of those moments where oh, hey guys, Number 1 is on the ship. And it was, so to me, it was like if we went to a dinner that was, price fixed menu, and we had all of these courses, but the chef that we were going to is known for a signature dish, and we knew that was going to be the main course, that the number one would be the serving right before that main course. It was good, but it really didn't do anything. As far as I felt, like she came in to talk about why on TOS they use view screens. And it's because of this particular moment. It was 2 lines of dialogue, and then she only reaffirmed that basically the Enterprise, the crew of the Enterprise, or at least the command structure of the Enterprise, was completely on board with the fact that Spock is getting the shaft, and that they're going to fight for their boy, which was evident already.
I want to disagree with him.
Okay, please disagree with me. But yeah, so like I really enjoyed her, but I just wanted to get to the main course of this early part of the season, which is Spock. Spock is the signature dish. Okay. And I thought that's what we were just doing. They were like, oh, we gave you Pike, we gave you Amanda, we gave you now we gave you number one. Next up is Spock, it's coming. And that's where we were. Please send me your disagreements, Dave.
Get him, Dave.
Well, I don't disagree that that's what they're doing, and they're sort of drawing out Spock. But I didn't think that it was a waste. I wanted to see that the crew was behind, not just they believe in Spock, but I saw some character development. Here's someone and Pike doesn't necessarily like it, is willing to break some regulations and bend some rules, but he likes it. He doesn't like it, but he likes it. I thought that was very cool. I saw a cool dynamic there that thankfully didn't speak to the 1964, I can't get used to a woman on the bridge. You're accepted, of course, number one. I saw a real connection, the same sort of connection between Pike and number one as you've seen with Picard and Riker, or Kirk and Spock, or really I feel that also between Saru and Burnham, and that's why I hope they're setting him up to be the captain.
Let's hope.
But the other thing that I think is important about seeing her is that we kind of want to see the Enterprise more, and it's being explained why we're not. And I think that's okay. Because why wouldn't he go back to his other ship if it's ready?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, for what it's worth, I loved this too. I mean, Cicero, I don't think that I would never say that you are wrong, because I don't believe that. I don't believe that you are wrong. It's just, I could actually literally say that I have been waiting my entire life to see more number one.
Sure.
I mean, 52 plus years have gone by. 54 plus years have gone by since this character actually she was one of the inaugural Star Trek characters. Even in that one episode, and I love The Cage to death, but she in particular showed such an immense amount of potential that was then left totally unexplored for the remainder of the franchise until now. And I was so satisfied with just finally getting another glimpse. I don't think that we've seen the last of her.
Right.
In fact, that might even be confirmed. I don't know that for a fact off the top of my head. But
if this was the only one and they were billing it, this would be a horrible, horrible misstep.
Well, and she's
by the crew.
Rebecca Romaine is a pretty high profile performer to get too for a part like this.
Right.
So I would.
Oh, she's a Star Trek fan, isn't she?
I would assume so.
I think
she seemed to indicate that she was, particularly after she got cast, I know. But I mean, as soon as they even alluded to the fact that she was going to be included, I was totally on board, because that character just seems like she has a great level of potential to explore. And even though we only got just a little bit of her, that's certainly a whole hell of a lot more from her than we've gotten over the course of the last half century.
Sure.
So,
and by the way, Rachel, I don't want to hear her name as a throwaway. I want to hear her name when there's a good reason for it, or hopefully in a Pike on the Enterprise series.
Okay, so you want it to be set up as a big reveal.
I want it to be not the same kind of throwaway moment as why we don't have holograms on the Enterprise.
How about this, Dave? The way that the way that Neota's name was established. How about something like that?
Yeah, something like that. That
was a workup, over the course of that movie. And that was one of those rare moments where the 2009 movie established something uniformly across the entire franchise,
right?
Which was cool.
Right.
But Yeah,
So,
who knows?
Chris, I will ask this of you on behalf of the rest of the panel.
Okay.
Was there anything, and this is a genuine question and not necessarily one that challenges, so I put everybody on their guard.
Okay.
Was there anything that happened during the course of that number one interaction that couldn't have been, was there a message that was conveyed that couldn't have been conveyed via another member of that crew, of the Enterprise crew, to Captain Pike? And or as Dave talked about the relationship between Pike and number one, and that rapport and that chemistry, or was there any portion of did you glean new type of chemistry or like personality traits from Pike that you hadn't already gleaned before from his relationship with Burnham?
Yes.
Okay.
The second part of your question I'll answer first. We had only seen up to this point the perspective of a new crew starting to interact with a new captain, and the establishment of the rapport between number one and Pike. I mean, we sort of saw the two other crew members of the Enterprise when they came aboard in the season premiere, but
Right.
It was different because these two people knew each other. They worked well together and had an established line of accomplishments together. So some of that was my own application, admittedly, but also too the playfulness that they exhibited to each other, particularly the interaction about Pike not liking holograms because they look like ghosts, and number one just kind of going, and she expected him to say that. I think that even in that small nugget of an interaction, there was something there that indicated that partnership that in my mind is legendary, even if it might not be legendary in some other people's minds. But also too, just the way that she conducted herself and see like her food choices, right? I mean, the cheeseburger and fries with the habanero sauce, I think it was. The heavy food that she ate is also an indicator of part of her personality that we'd never seen before. They certainly didn't explore that in the cage. And it showed that even this pretty serious character also has a level of fierceness, because she is not only willing to break the law, but she is willing to not give up Spock without a fight. And I really appreciated that. So,
well, we're also seeing, I think, why Spock was willing to throw away his career for Pike.
Sure.
Here's a crew who perhaps are willing to throw away their careers for Spock.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very well said.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that generally encompasses my perspective on number one, but I'm also admittedly biased because I've wanted to see this character again for literally my whole life. Right. So take that for what you will. But let's move along with the plot. So in the captain's ready room, Pike and Burnham learn that number one has provided Pike with the course heading for the shuttlecraft Spock stole in his escape from Starbase 5. Pike wants Burnham to extend an olive branch to her adoptive brother, but she seems to be nervous about the prospect because of possible emotional abuse she may have inflicted on him, and thinks she'll make things worse. Right at that moment, Discovery is plucked from warp by an unknown object and endures major damage. So this was something that was alluded to as well in Burnham's conversation with Amanda Grayson when she was aboard Discovery. But the point I want to bring up is totally at the credit of Zachy, because he brought something up when we were preparing to discuss season 2 that I think might actually begin to happen, or it's starting to happen. Zachy once told this panel that he thought it would be unwise for the creative team behind Discovery to create a sense of antagonism between Burnham and Spock, because there's no way in the minds of the adulation of fans for Burnham to win that fight. It puts Burnham on an immediate back foot, and any conflict between the two, Spock is going to have the advantage because he's the known entity. He's Spock. He's one of the most defining pillars of the entire franchise. And Burnham will just be at an immediate disadvantage if there's any kind of antagonism created between the two. So do you guys think that this is a good way to go in exploring this relationship, or do you agree with Zachy? Would you have preferred another path be taken? I know we talked about this a little bit at the top of the show, but what do you think about this idea that, well, if you have to choose between Michael Burnham and Spock, aren't you just going to choose Spock? Rachel.
Well, yeah, of course you're going to choose Spock. It seems like what they're setting up is that Burnham is the bad guy here, but she is self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
So she did something intentionally to drive him away that was really bad and potentially abusive.
Mm-hmm.
But she had a reason behind it.
As Dave said, it was out of love.
Yeah, it was out of love. And she is aware and somewhat tortured, perhaps, by this decision to take these actions, whatever she did.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of sets her up as the bad guy, if you have to cast it like that, right? I think...
How about this? Is it a binary equation, or does it have to be?
No, that's what I was going to say, is that I think the sort of resolution to that conflict of you always taking Spock's side in any disagreement is if you have a scenario where they're both wrong.
Sure.
Right? So I mean, I could see like her trying to apologize and he doesn't want to accept it, but you see where both of them are coming from, and then it works, right? Mm. So yeah, I don't think there's any need for us to be turned against Spock to understand what's going on in the relationship dynamic here.
Very well said. Cicero, what do you think? Is it a binary choice between the two, or do you agree with Rachel that it could go in a different direction?
Hashtag Rachel is right. I think that Zachy is correct in so much as saying that fans will always choose Spock. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. I think that goes back to to one of my earlier points, which is that Burnham will have this tragic, be the tortured soul. She will continue to be tortured, I think, throughout this series. And I think they would be smart to create, the writers would be smart to create this level of nuance to this character that allows you to look at her complexly, with a level of complexity where you can say, oh yes, she definitely did this thing to one of my favorite characters in all of pop culture lore, in Spock, that drove him away and kind of informed who he is. And I don't necessarily appreciate her for that, but now I understand why she did it. And I can empathize with not only that decision, but several of the decisions that I've seen her experience over the hopefully several years that I get to live with this character. So so I think there is there are lots of layers there, and it definitely isn't a binary choice.
Okay, well expressed as always. Dave, what do you think about that? Is this a binary choice between someone you know so well and someone who's relatively new to the table, or are you in agreement with Cicero and Rachel?
I'm in agreement with Cicero and Rachel, which sort of puts me in agreement with Zachy as well, in that Spock would be the one you choose, which is why I think it would be. This is going to sound weird. I don't think it's about us.
Yeah.
I think this is about their relationship, which, by the way, this is one messed up family.
Sure.
Sarek, Amanda, Michael, and Spock are all very, very messed up, and they've done it basically to each other. And that's, I don't know, that's a lot like a lot of families out there. I find the whole, interestingly enough, I guess there's only 1.5 non-humans in the group. but it's a very human sort of a family story. And by the way, torturing your characters is just interesting. Kirk was at his most interesting when he was that, no beach to walk on guy, or when he was obsessed with something, or feeling old in Star Trek II, or whatever. I've written 2 books where I've put Spock through hell because that's interesting. And like I say, I don't know that it's anybody's particular fault, and I don't want them to necessarily resolve it. I just want each of them to walk away with a better understanding of the other person at the end. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that everything's worked out. Something I really want to talk about is Amanda's anger. I guess it's in the previous episode at Michael, where she kisses her, by the way, which is, my wife turned to me and said, that's a mama bear moment. She was basically just saying, I'm upset with you. We are going to discuss this later, but I love you.
Right.
And I think I really liked Amanda in that moment, even though it's funny. Michael says that she did something to push Spock away, but I think Amanda's upset because she did the same thing, and both of them expected the other one to not do that.
Right.
But like I say, they're messed up.
Especially when you throw Ichaya into the mix.
Oh, don't make me cry.
Yeah, I mean, you guys bring up very compelling points. I'm not going to lie. I am a little, I guess, miffed at the idea that this is an antagonism, because I expressed a year ago that I was really hoping that they would just kind of take things into a different direction. But really, at the end of the day, there's probably no other way this could have played out, if considering everything that we know about Spock and now what we know about Michael, even what we knew about Michael in the first season, creating this kind of a dynamic between them, it just makes sense. I think it's the path of least resistance, which is probably what kind of miffed me about it when thinking a year ago about what they were going to do and exploring their relationship. But they need not do this creative wizardry or back handsprings or whatever it is to dance around the idea of some form of resentment on one side or both. But yeah, I mean, Dave, you're absolutely right. This is about them. This is about the journey that they both go on in becoming more complete people. Michael has the benefit of being probably in a more complete position just because she's older. And we know that Spock goes on an entire journey of self-discovery over the course of the rest of his life. He's not even really settled into his human half until he dies and comes back and starts to become more comfortable with that half of himself. We're not going to see that side of him resolved this early in his life. This is a Spock who is in a more tumultuous place than potentially we've ever seen him before. And understanding that, I think, is key, at least for me personally, to get around this idea of being disappointed that they're going with the resentment angle.
I just want to disagree briefly. I think Spock found his balance after the motion picture, not after he died in Star Trek 3.
That's a fair point. I mean,
because in Star Trek 2, he actually says things like, were I to invoke logic, as opposed to, it seems to be a choice for him after that.
After trying to go through Kolinar, seeing that extreme might have just pushed him a little. Well, over the course of the motion picture, we see him embrace his human side more. Not only does he weep, but he's trying to express to Admiral Kirk, just the understanding that physical contact can bring, which is a very kind of poetic, non-Vulcan way of trying to explain something. So yeah, upon further reflection, I think you're right. I agree with you. But either way, that's still a long time from now in the scheme of the of the chronology. So
how old is he in this?
He was born in.
Is he like 23, 24?
He's close. I think he's 26 or 7 because I think he was born in 2230 and this is 2257.
And Vulcans live a long time. I know that I wasn't fully cooked until I was in my 30s.
Yeah. Yeah, very well
I'm
said.
still not fully cooked now. And I'm about to be in my mid 40s. Oh, damn.
I'm 49. I'm in my
Right.
crumbling stage.
Oh man. Well, either way, though, I mean, I like that. That was a good point of discussion. But let's move along. So, while trying to break free of the sphere's grip, Discovery's crew determines that the sphere itself is actually an ancient living being that has gathered gargantuan amounts of data about the galaxy, and it starts to transmit that data to Discovery just before dying. And I know that condensing all of the stuff that happened there, I know that I'm kind of glossing over the fact that it presented a problem for the crew to solve, but it showed the way that they react in a crisis scenario and ultimately got them to the point where they understand exactly what this thing is trying to do and how it's trying to interact with them. And I have to say, I was really impressed with the way that this episode took a pretty long-standing trope of the franchise in First Contact and flipped it in such a way that it made it tragic and emotionally engaging while also making for a unique plot point. So what did you guys make of this being? Were you satisfied with the way that the show interpreted Last Contact? And full disclosure, I always love in this franchise when a thought-to-be bad alien is being shown to be benevolent through greater understanding. But Cicero, what did you think of this creature?
So they took two tropes, as you kind of alluded to, Chris. They took two classic Star Trek tropes and completely turned them on their head. Much the same that they did, much like they did in the episode where we had the actual First Contact that turned out to not be First Contact in the what was that, the second episode? Yeah, it was the second episode.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. I adore the fact that not only do we get to see this Trek crew involved so far in Trek-like scenarios, but we get to see them done in such different ways. And I'm so looking forward to watching this crew explore these same types of tropes that we've seen in, please let's have all sorts of popular Star Trek tropes done remixed for Discovery. Continue the trope remixing. I'm here for it. Hashtag trope remix.
Well said. Dave, what did you make of Last Contact and everything that came with it?
I loved it. I really did. Although I think it's probably not the first time we've seen Last Contact. I think probably Inner Light from TNG is kind of, and I think probably Masks would fit that. But that doesn't mean, how many stories are there? But this was a unique way to tell it, a unique way to fit in some real change in Saru's character, and in seeing how his relationship with Burnham has developed. And I'm really excited to see what this new, not so fearful and feeling powerful Saru might be like. Like I say, I really hope they're setting him up to be the captain. I'd love to see that.
He's certainly been through the ringer. That's for damn sure.
Also, before you get to more people, again, we get to see the short treks bear fruit.
Right. We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get
sorry.
Yes. No. This is perfectly valid. But yes, you're absolutely right. Rachel, Last Contact. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I didn't see it so much as a twist on the First Contact trope as a scary alien is actually not scary trope, and everything is wrong with the ship trope.
Right. It's a triple trope.
Disaster is that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I don't even know if that happened multiple. No, it also happened another time, right?
Oh yeah.
Everything is wrong with the ship.
Year of Hell comes to mind.
Exactly.
But, so yeah, I liked it. Thought it was familiar. went by a little bit fast again. But yeah, I mean, I just wish sometimes they would linger a little bit on certain moments, but they did in the SARU subplot to some extent.
Right. Everything
So-
else was, that's an interesting point though, because everything else was kind of moving at a breakneck pace except for that stuff,
Yeah.
which was another element of pretty impeccable design, I think. But yeah, and Dave, you're absolutely right in bringing up Inner Light. I prefer not to think about masks generally, but that's still valid.
Same here.
But I liked how it actually used the what?
Mess not so bad.
You always say that
About TNG
Yeah.
episodes, yeah.
Right. Even Shades of Grey isn't that bad to you anymore.
It wasn't that bad. I want as far as it was not so bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I didn't say I wouldn't watch it if it was on. I just don't like to think of it that often.
fair enough. But I mean, I like how it actually used the words "last contact." I guess it made it more explicit, like an explicit kind of inversion on the trope, and I think that's what I appreciated too, that it actually spelled it out by twisting it that way. But also too, I mean, it's what I like to see from the no pun intended, from the discovering side of Star Trek, actually coming to a greater level of understanding about something that is alien to them, that leads them to a conclusion of actual benevolence instead of it commands them to put aside their instinct to shoot the thing that is unfamiliar, and forces them to actually think through.
Even though Pike was about to.
Yeah, he wanted to, and he would have, but he used his command wisdom in a way that did not do that and let the scientists do their job to actually come to a fuller conclusion about the thing that was in front of them. And I love
Feels like Star Trek, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Right.
I couldn't have put it better myself. It is trekking through the stars in a way that I love to see. And I mean, as much as you can criticize aspects of the franchise that are a little too trigger happy, as long as you pepper stuff like this in, it doesn't have to be every episode, but as long as it's there, I'm going to be happy. And that's what I think of when I think of this plot. So let's move along again to.
Before you do, I have a really quick comment of something you just said. It made me think of it. As long as this stuff is, peppered in there. If we look back to any episode of any of these franchise shows,
Mhm.
I gotta say, there are things that stick out to me in really bad plots. Bread and Circuses was I think it was first season episode.
Yeah.
That's stupid. I mean, it's a 1960s Rome equivalent, which is just a dumb idea. But that episode is totally worth it for the scene between McCoy and Spock in the jail cell.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And I think we forget that. We forget that the original Star Trek had some goofy stuff going on that didn't make a lot of sense, but it was the characters that we connected with.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Very well said. I mean, it speaks to the best of the franchise, at least when it in its intent to tell stories about aspects of humanity by slapping green paint on them. And
This is why Rachel likes masks.
yeah. Oh boy, we're gonna maybe we'll have to do a debrief's favorites and bring up masks for some reason.
Right. Oh gosh.
My favorite.
Well, semi favorites.
No.
We'll find a way.
Yeah, debrief's not so bad.
That's a good one. All right, well, let's move along with the plot. So SARU enters Vaharai, a Kelpian terminal biological process, but after the sphere dies, he recovers and finds himself physically and emotionally improved. SARU spent much of the episode preparing for his imminent death, a practice which we know is intimately familiar to he and his kind. And after the entity releases Discovery and its crew, he learns that his once thought terminal death process that he thought was applied to his entire species has actually unshackled him from the fear he'd grown accustomed to his entire life. His threat ganglia fall away, and he has a newfound resolve, and he's seriously considering changing the destiny of his people to tell them that everything they once thought about themselves is just the beginning of their existence and not the end of it. And the conclusion that he draws is that it might be worth breaking the Prime Directive in order to return his people's destiny to them. Holy shit. This hit me square in the chest. And I guess, now we know what the brightest star short was. Cicero talked about this just a couple minutes ago. So guys, run through your thoughts specifically for me on this new significant addition to the arc of not just SARU, but the Kelpian people at large, especially considering what we learned about them in the short trek. So Dave, you already alluded to your thoughts about this, but expand on them. What do you think this could mean? Do you think that the story is going to go there when it comes to actually breaking General Order 1? But what about just the thematic aims? How did it connect with you?
I love Saru, and so, like I say, the first thing that I really thought was they're setting him up for captain, but I hadn't actually thought that he's really going to do anything.
Right.
But at the same time, I guess they did build a set, and everything for the planet. So I'm guessing that we're going to see something. If not this season, next season.
Well, he looked pissed though at the end? Like once he realized what he had gone through,
Right?
Did he not look just pissed to high heaven?
Yeah, boy.
He looked determined.
He did.
Yeah, determined. Yes. Determined is probably a good way to put it. But also, I think he feels like he's found himself. I mean, his basic implication was he's matured, and is it the Baul?
Yeah. Right, yeah.
The Baul are keeping his people immature, I guess.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Although I got to tell you, I'm very confused by they're Kelpians, but they're from Kaminar, and the Baul are there. I guess the planet shouldn't be called Kelpia, but it confuses me.
Well, because they're kelp farmers. What are you talking about?
Is that right?
They farm kelp. That's when we first saw more Kelpians in the Prime universe. They were in the marshes grabbing kelp.
I guess they were.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
Into the baskets. So it is not who what they do is who they are.
Well, and I'm crossing the streams a little bit here, but I kind of had the same incongruous reaction, I guess, to Kashyyyk being the home planet of the Wookiees.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, where did that come from exactly? But
why aren't they from Wookiee?
Right. Yeah. Well, who are the Kashyikians?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. What happened to them?
Right.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Maybe the Wookiees were one day like the Kelpians, but then they took over the planet. Right. Who knows? But
the Wookiees ate them.
Right.
There you go. Yeah. Well, so Cicero, I mean, you've often talked about your love of Saru as a character, and how you hope. I mean, oh man, I was really sure for a second there that we weren't going to see him again. But how did you go on the journey that this episode presented, and what do you think it means for the future of he and his people potentially?
All right, so I'm going to give everybody a warning. Apparently, this episode, Cicero Holmes was played by a pod person, because so I'm so conflicted about what transpired. First, I was on the ride, wholly believing and hoping that we weren't going to see the death of Saru by the end of the episode, because it just didn't feel right. And so I'm glad that part didn't happen, but in a way, maybe it did, because
the old Saru is dead.
The old Saru is dead. And I don't know if that's a good thing. Because part of what made Saru who he was the fact that he constantly did live in fear, and he was constantly battling his instinct to be a great commander, to be a great leader. But I think the fear didn't hold him back as much as it made him think.
I would hope it's going to be a mixed bag.
So I think we're definitely going back to the home world that is not called Kelpia. And we're going back this season because the set's already built and the makeup is already done. We're not going to save that for next season.
Mm-hmm. The makeup being done is a good point.
Yeah. And he is going to try and Moses his way through his people. But the fundamental thing that he doesn't understand, or he won't understand until we get there, is that the process through which he went was unique to him. And that is how he got to where he is today. And the Kelpians are completely ignorant to the world or to the galaxy that surrounds them. And he is informed by all of that knowledge. And it was all of that knowledge along with the things that were happening in that particular moment through the course of this episode that got him to that monumental point where he eschewed his fear and wanted to die with grace, and confessed everything to Burnham, his surrogate sister, and those are things that no other Kelpian has ever experienced or will ever experience, and they will reject him outright. First his father, and then ultimately his sister. Yeah, that's what I've been doing all day today. I don't know. I got to get.
Well,
I hope that's all right. I like it.
Oh, hey, it's good, man. No, it's good. It would definitely be powerful. That's for sure. You can't ever take away from the detail of Cicero's predictions, because when he's right, he's really right. And even if it might not quite align with what he predicts, it's still kind of on the right track. Cicero's a very smart man, and you never discount what he has to say. Rachel, what did this journey look like for you? Were you pretty into it, and what do you think of how this could potentially line up for SARU's future and the future of his people?
Yeah, well, Doug Jones is a busy guy, so I was thinking, well, maybe he has something else to do. They're going to kill him off of this. But no, he didn't die, and I'm happy about that. I'm excited about it. I think it's interesting that he had kind of been of the mindset that Kelpians were just like this, like they were just sort of destined to live in this manner. Mm-hmm. And he found out that was not the case, and that they are being oppressed by the Ba'ul intentionally, and kept ignorant with regards to their own potential. So, he's kind of like woke Saru now. Right. He knows the truth. And I don't know how, if you had that knowledge, how you could not at least try to do something to change the situation for all of your people. Sure. Mm-hmm. Because it's not the natural order of things. It's a system that is set up that is intentionally oppressing them. And I think that has that's very fertile ground for many very Star Trek-y kind of stories you could tell. Yeah. One of which is certainly what Cicero kind of outlined in his predictions, is that you go back and you can say over and over again, like, this is what, you're being oppressed, this is bad. And if they're not willing to hear it, then nothing could change. Right. But there's a lot of other avenues that could be explored too. And I'm looking forward to those being explored.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you could say potentially that it could come down to whether they decide to solve systemic oppression or to illustrate what it looks like in the world that we live in. Right.
Right.
And I honestly don't know which way they could go with it. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Cicero and with Dave that showing what it actually, what usually happens in the real world when trying to expose a kind of systemic oppression, it's like a rejection of the idea that the person being oppressed is actually being oppressed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that
But
would
it also leads to instability, right? And
Oh,
so
sure.
that's the
Right.
thing, is that
Right.
they have this like very stable, sort of peaceful system that is
Right.
actually quite violent towards the Kelpians, but nobody really realizes it.
Mhm.
Right.
So sort of upsetting that could look like chaos, right? And
But if we use the
that's an
Kirk
interesting
exception, all we have
Yeah.
to do is put the ship in danger, and then you can violate the Prime Directive.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened in the Apple and
Right.
in Return of the Archons and about 1,700 other episodes.
Right.
Well, we need more information. See, now you're bringing in the canonical side of this, but we really need more information about the Baal, because
Right.
why does the Prime Directive apply so rigidly to this world that has had, conceivably anyway, like I said, we need more information, but it has conceivably already had its destiny changed. I would be interested to
Are the
see.
Baul not from
From the-
Kaminar?
Right. Right.
I was led to believe that they weren't, because the communications device that he used in the short, wasn't it more advanced than anything that the Kelpians had?
Right.
I
The
thought
Kelpians-
Yeah, but you can have two distinct civilizations on one planet.
Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's
absolutely.
true. Yeah, Star Trek has
Absolutely.
explored that a lot too.
Well, I mean, hey, the Earth has explored that a lot. There was just a guy who was murdered by bow and arrows, from some civilization that just wants to be left alone. And they're essentially pygmies. Like
Right.
they're living in this technologically, prehistoric manner, and we're talking to each other through a series of tubes.
Right. Space age tubes.
Right. So
I'm talking to you on a typewriter connected to a TV. I don't know what you're talking
right. We are using a communication. We are literally using a communication device right now,
Mhm.
far more advanced than that society ever known.
Well, and there is admittedly a rather simplistic threshold by which Starfleet defines a society that has the Prime Directive apply to it, and that's warp capability.
Right.
So it's possible that even presuming that the Baal could come from another planet, or if they're from the same planet, if none of them have warp capability, then that's probably going to be the dividing line. But
Hey guys,
still,
hold on a second. What if the Baul are Kelpians without threat ganglia? What?
So
You never see them.
You've never
It's
seen
true.
them. Yep.
It's true. Well, that food for thought. We'll have to see what actually takes place over the course of the next few weeks. But let me also just say kudos to both Sonequa Martin Green and Doug Jones for a pretty legitimately powerful interplay.
Sure.
And the writing and the pacing of the episode was incredible. Like I said before, I mean, I was convinced that they were going to pull a Game of Thrones and actually kill off SARU, and the swerve just totally got me.
I convinced my wife that he was going to die because she was out of town and I'd watched it on Thursday.
Oh,
And I watched it and she came back and I was like, yep, it's sad. He's going to die.
Brutal.
You're
Brutal.
terrible.
Wow. I hope she didn't smack you across the face.
No, she actually, I'm not a good liar. So about, 30 seconds into that, she turned to me and said, you're full of crap.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, but yeah, either way, I mean, this was a really great performance to observe on both of their parts. And the way, I mean, Sonequa Martin Green, my God, when she starts crying, I start crying every single time. So that the emotional part of the episode was great. So last part is we kind of just glossed over the stuff that's happening with Tilly, but the sentient fungal parasite that Stamets removed from Tilly's body in the previous episode latches onto her and kidnaps her. And this is where, we start to learn about the mycelial network being potentially damaging and everything. But that stuff, I don't think we have quite enough information on, because we saw it swallow Tilly and we saw her come out of it.
She's had a bad day. She got her head drilled into.
Yeah.
And then all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Oh, that was brutal. Jeez.
That was rough. But we haven't talked. Obviously, I'm scared for Tilly. And I still think this is going to be the beginning of the end for the Spore Drive. But we haven't talked about Jet Reno. So let's end the discussion. Let's talk about Jet Reno for a second. How great is she? And should she be a recurring character? Or maybe you guys feel totally differently. I mean, I'm really enamored with her. But Dave, what do you think of Jet Reno?
I love her. I want her to become a big part of the show. If not the chief engineer, then the link to the chief engineer.
Sure.
Because she comes and she says, I wasn't aware a greenhouse was critical or propulsive. And I just cracked up. So I adore her, and I like that she takes Stamets, who's a little bit arrogant, down a couple of pegs.
Yeah.
And yet I also got the vibe that these two could become best friends.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's a really good observation. They have those kinds of personalities that seem like they could mesh well together if they get over each other too at the same time.
You mean both sarcastic jerks? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Rachel, Jet Reno, what do you think of Jet Reno, and you want to see more of her on an ongoing basis, or how does she strike you?
Yeah, I really like her, and I think kind of we have sort of an absence of an engineer character, especially since Stamets has kind of ascended to the mycelial plane, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's kind of not really an engineer, so we don't.
He was never an engineer. He's
he's a spore scientist,
an astromycologist.
Yeah, right. But I felt like he was kind of like fulfilling that role in terms of the cast, because he was like the person who was making the ship go.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't have an engineer who can kind of, get things done in short amounts of time and do impossible tasks and stuff. And so,
miracle worker.
Yeah. So it'd be nice to have a character like that, and she's cool. So
yeah. Cicero, I know you're a big Tig Notaro fan, and now that we've seen more of Jet Reno, what do you think?
Hey guys, remember when Tig Notaro was a stand-up comedian and not a seminal character on Star Trek? I
don't.
Right, exactly. Like it. So you talked about how she talked about she being Tig. Talked about being nervous about this role and how difficult it was. Man, she took all of that nervous energy and she threw it right into that role. Either that, or maybe that, and also this must be the greatest collection of nice people who are talented actors ever assembled on one set at one time, because the chemistry between everyone is phenomenal. And Tig came in just right off the bat, and this, like, the rapid fire between her and between Reno and Stamets is, oh man, Anthony Rapp, mwah, oh, you are a beautiful human being, because Tig Notaro is funny and you held your own. Oh my goodness, that was superb. Oh man. So I've only watched this episode once. I need to watch it again anyway, but when I do, like, that's going to be one of those things that I'm really looking forward to watching again, was just the repartee between the two of them. And then every now and then you get a quip from Tilly. And it was just perfect. Like, ooh, wow, there you go. There's the cherry.
It's like, she's like mom and dad are fighting.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, it was phenomenal.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I think that she's great. I would love to see more of her on an ongoing basis. Tig Notaro's schedule permitting, of course, and think that she's a great addition to the dynamic of the crew. And she brings a characterization that did not exist in the cast before too,
Right.
which I think is important.
Yes.
So bring on more of Jed Reno. All right, guys. Well, we got through 2 episodes. That was a hell of a discussion. Much appreciated as usual. But Dave, in particular, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you sticking through the whole thing. If people want to find you online, where can they go? And do you have anything you want to tell us about anything that you may have coming down the pike? No pun intended.
Nothing I can tell you about right now.
Okay.
I am at Dave Galanter on Twitter, although I don't tweet that much. And you can find me on Facebook under my name. I have a huge digital footprint. Probably if you Google me, you'll find me somewhere.
Excellent. Well, once again, thanks for joining us. Hope you had a good time.
I did. I had a great time. Thanks for having me, guys. You are fun to talk Star Trek with.
Oh, good. Glad to know. Well, our turbolift doors are always open to you. Well, that's going to do it, everybody, for episode 35 of Discovery Debrief. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please like and follow us on our social media channels. And if you'd be so kind, we'd also appreciate it if you wrote a review for the show on iTunes or Facebook. It only takes a minute, and we'll be happy to read your review on the air when it's posted. Speaking of which, Debrief has engaged into a partnership with the developers of officially licensed browser-based game Star Trek Alien Domain Incursion. Send us proof of your review of the show on social media or via email, and we'll send you a key code that's worth approximately $60 of in-game items. It is that simple. Just send us your review. You get a code either through a Twitter direct message or an email. However you want to get in touch with us is fine. If you have any questions, you can follow the show on Twitter at DSC Debrief, where you can also find all of our individual Twitter handles. And feel free to send us questions through Twitter, our Facebook like page, or by emailing us at hailingfrequencies@discoverydebrief.com. Please be sure to set your courses for this feed for future episodes, and be sure to join us as we convene next time to discuss a brand new episode of our subject series as we continue into Season 2. As always, though, until we meet again, please go boldly, my friends.